Thank you guys for having me here today. I want to start by giving you a bit of a background and intro to who I am and my story. And then myself and Andre will do a bit of a fireside chat where he can ask me questions, and I think some of those questions actually came from you guys. But before I begin with my story, one of the things that I want to explain is why I'm actually here today. And there really are two reasons why I thought being here and speaking to all of you was important. The first reason is that every one of my businesses that I've built myself, I did as a student. And I actually think one of the most important and valuable lessons being an entrepreneur is leveraging your environment. And so as I tell you these stories today, I hope you'll understand how I consistently leverage my environment as being a student to create these businesses that in many cases became really meaningful and changed my life. That's the first reason. The second reason I wanted to be here today was because last year, François Julien, the dean of the Telfer School of Business at Ottawa, invited me to give the convocation speech to his graduates. And I prepared this, what I thought was a really great speech, and I got in front of everyone and gave this inspiring speech about how all these MBAs should take their MBA degrees and go out and do great things in the world. And at the end of my talk, this guy approached me, and it was Andre. I didn't know who he was. And he said, "I'm not actually supposed to be here. I'm not an MBA student. I don't even know what this building is. But I came because I saw on Twitter you posted that you were giving this talk. And when I saw that, I guess he was coming out of the shower or something. He immediately put on some clothing, and he ended up coming to Telfer. And he said, "I just came here to ask you if you would keynote the Legacy Conference." And I immediately said, "Of course I would. You are exemplifying exactly what I believe is so important as an entrepreneur, which is hustle." And so, Andre, that hustle that you showed that day, coming and sneaking into the MBA ceremony is the reason I'm here. So big ups to you for that. So my story as an entrepreneur starts a long time ago. When I was 13 years old, I really wanted to be a DJ. I used to go to these birthday parties and weddings and bar mitzvahs, and I'd see these DJs playing, and they were just creating this incredible energy for the crowd. And I decided that I want to be a DJ, and I think I was in 7th or 8th grade at the time. I was living in Montreal. And I started emailing, or I guess this is pre-email, so I guess I was calling these DJ companies, asking them if they would hire me. And surprisingly, there was actually the market for inexperienced, no-talent DJs who were 13 years old, who looked like they were 8 years old, was a very small market. So, as you can imagine, so I decided that the way that I would solve that problem would be to start my own DJ company. I figured that I can hire myself. If it's my company, I can hire anybody I want, so I can hire myself to do that job. And so when I was 13 years old, I created this company with the worst name in the world. It was called Executive Sounds. Terrible name. And my dad went out and made me business cards, which made me feel really great. And that was sort of my first exposure to business and to entrepreneurship. And I would go around to all my neighbors, and I would ask them if I can DJ their kids' birthday parties, their barbecues, and I found a rental company. And I would charge, I don't know, $150 to DJ this party, and the rental was like $250, so I was already losing money. But it taught me a lot about responsibility, taught me a lot about getting out there and hustling hard and convincing people to buy what I was selling, even if they didn't want to buy that. When I was 17 years old, I started McGill University. I was a first-year undergrad at McGill in economics. And my family had gone through some financial hardship that year. It was 2001. The stock market had crashed. My dad was in finance. And I had to start supporting myself. And I really didn't know what to do. I knew I didn't want to move back home and live with my parents, because that's not really that much fun. And I knew that if I took a normal job working in a cafe or something like that, I wouldn't be able to support myself the way I wanted to. And so I started asking around in class if anyone knew of a business that I can start. And I'm sure it's not surprising to hear that there were very few businesses you can start with no experience and no money. But I continued to ask around. And it turned out that a friend of mine was on student council at McGill University in 2001. And he had told me that McGill University purchased about $25,000 worth of promotional t-shirts every single year. I thought that was interesting. I wear a black t-shirt every day. I've worn t-shirts my whole life. I like t-shirts. I didn't know much about the t-shirt business at that point. But that was all I needed to hear, that there was an opportunity to sell t-shirts to McGill. And I went out and I found a little screen printing machine for about $8,000. And I took a small business loan, SBL, out. and I taught myself how to screen print. So there I was living on Dr. Penfield in Montreal, some of you may know the area, and I had a screen printing machine, I knew how to screen print, but I had no customers. No one was buying from me. And I would go to McGill Student Council and say, here I am, a student at your university with skills, with a great product, send me an order, give me an order, give me some business. McGill didn't want. They were looking for the risk-averse solution. They wanted to go with a big company to supply them with t-shirts because the big company was a throat to choke. If I did something wrong, they couldn't sue me. I wasn't worth anything. You can't drain blood out of a rock. So what I did was I figured out what are the things that I had going for me that these bigger t-shirt providers didn't have. Well, number one, I was an owner-operator. I was the company. And so I gave them my cell phone number and told them if they ever had any problems, they can call me directly. What I also did was I noticed that these larger companies, when they were providing samples and they were doing the pitch to the university, they were showing a catalog, and they were kind of showing these pictures of what they could produce. What I did instead was I actually produced the samples that they were looking for. And so I literally showed up at that pitch with the t-shirts that they were thinking of buying. And so I made the experience better for them. I also ensured that I always over-delivered. So if they ordered 200 t-shirts, I brought them 210. And over time, very slowly, these universities across Canada, including most of the universities here in Ottawa, started buying t-shirts from me. And I spent the rest of my undergrad degree, unfortunately not studying, but building this t-shirt business. And I fell in love with entrepreneurship. It was the most exciting thing in the world that I was able to create something out of nothing. And all the while, as I went on through my education at McGill, I started asking for feedback from students. So for example, around 2001, there was a big shift in the t-shirt manufacturing. Dove Charney created American Apparel that year. And the ribs of the t-shirts, sort of around the collar, went from being thick rib to thin rib. And I actually was an early adopter of that because I noticed the students around me were already wearing those type of t-shirts. And so I was constantly using my professors as a board of directors and a board of advisors, my classmates as beta testers. I was taking advantage of the things that I had that these big companies didn't have. In 2004, I was finishing undergrad, and I developed this really good group of mentors, and I'm sure we'll talk about mentors later on with Andre, but I developed this good group of mentors. And one of my mentors had told me that although I had this really nice t-shirt business, about 50 universities were buying their t-shirts from me, I didn't have a real competitive advantage. I had no moat around my business. And in the same way that I was able to disrupt these big companies like Gildan and American Apparel, other companies, smaller companies, can disrupt me. And he encouraged me to actually figure out something that was more, that had more of a competitive advantage. He also encouraged me that I should figure out what did I find was lacking in my own acumen as an entrepreneur. And I'd begun that year to work with a lot of lawyers on licensing. Every time you print a t-shirt with a university logo on it, you actually have to do a licensing agreement. And I began to spend a lot of money on lawyers. And this particular mentor, he decided to take a year off from being a lawyer and teach law at the University of Ottawa. And so he said I should maybe apply to law school and move to Ottawa. So without even giving it any further thought, I moved to Ottawa in 2005, and I began my law degree at FOTA, University of Ottawa. And my philosophy when I got there was very simple. I wasn't going to law school to become a lawyer. I was actually going to law school to leverage becoming a better entrepreneur. I felt that if I understood the law better than most entrepreneurs did, then my ability and my agility to negotiate faster, better, more effectively would actually give me a leg up. And when I moved to Ottawa, I didn't know anyone. I had no friends. I had no family here. I didn't know the community. But I met a couple guys from a little organization which is now called Invest Ottawa. It used to be called OCRE. And I asked them if they knew where entrepreneurs hung out. And they started directing me to different people around the city. Guys like Luc Levesque, guys like Aidan Mirzahi. People that were really great entrepreneurs, sort of my vintage, that were doing cool things in town. And Aidan, who you'll meet, I think, after I speak, Aidan invited me to a little coffee shop in the Glebe. I think it was on 2nd Avenue. It was a bridgehead. And there was a group of entrepreneurs at this coffee shop that hung out every Friday night, that shared war stories, helped each other, provided best practices, shared their experiences of what was working, what wasn't working. We made a list of people, whether it was lawyers or accountants, that we all agreed were really good people to use. Made a list of people we shouldn't be using. And I started showing up at this coffee shop almost every Friday night. And it was guys like Luke from TravelPod and Aidan from SurveyMonkey, Sam from Get Around, Paul from Spartan Bioscience. And this became my tribe. This became my Ottawa tribe. There was one other person that was hanging out there, and it was this guy named Toby. And those of you that know Toby and know me a little bit know that we are polar opposites. He's the most brilliant man in the world. He says 2 words when he probably should say 3 words, and I say 10 words when I should say probably 2 words. But we really clicked. At the time, Toby had moved to Ottawa from Germany because he met a girl. And when he moved here, he decided he wanted to sell snowboards on the internet. But around 2004, there were only 2 ways to sell a product online. The first way was to spend $1 million and have some big enterprise company build you an online store. And the other way would be to sell it on a marketplace like eBay or Etsy or Amazon, which wouldn't really allow you to build your own business. And so being this brilliant engineer and programmer, Toby decided to write his own piece of software to sell his own snowboards. And he very quickly realized that although the snowboard business was a good idea, that maybe the software behind that business was a great idea. And so he decided in 2005 to stop selling snowboards and start selling software to help people build online stores. So there I am at this coffee shop, first year law school. My t-shirt business that I had from undergrad was really predicated on my ability to meet people face to face. So I'd fly to Calgary or I'd fly to Dalhousie and I'd meet these student councils face to face and I'd convince them to buy my t-shirts. I was able to skip school really in undergrad. But in law school, it doesn't work like that. You skip class, you're done. And so I needed a business that would be virtual, that could make money and can grow concurrently while I was studying, while I was in class. And I decided, I'm going to continue on this t-shirt business, but I'm going to flip the model around. Instead of selling wholesale promotional products to universities, I'm going to sell retail direct to consumer. And so I purchased the rights to some brands for very small geographies. I bought the rights to the Dark Knight Batman movie in Northern Ontario, and I bought the rights to Paul Frank in Montreal. And so I had a bunch of licenses which provided me the ability to sell these products. And I went to Toby, and I told him what I was doing, and I asked him if I could be one of the first customers of Shopify. And about a year later, I launched what's called Smoofer.com, which was a licensed t-shirt website. And this was an incredible experience for me because this was my first interaction with entrepreneurship and technology. And you know what? I loved it even more than I did entrepreneurship on its own. Technology provided this incredible leverage to what I loved about entrepreneurship. It allowed me to sell all over the world, all over Canada, while sitting in tax law class, which is freaking boring. And I continued to grow this business throughout my law degree. I then did an MBA at Telfer. And in 2008, I moved out to Toronto to do what's called articling. After you finish law school, you do a 10-month article, 10 months of articles, which allows you to get licensed and called to the Ontario bar. So I moved to Toronto, and I went to go work at a big law firm. And I hated it. It was the worst 10 months of my entire life. Unlike entrepreneurship, which is all about merit, where the best person with the best ideas is the one that rises, in law, it was all about tenure. It was all about how long you've been there for. And that was the antithesis of my whole philosophy around life, which is that the person with the best idea should push forward, not the person with the famous last name or the person whose father has connections. So I really didn't like law. And so after about 8 months of working in this law firm, I decided I wasn't going to continue. I finished my 10 months, but I wasn't going to stay in the practice of law. And I called Toby. At the time, he and about 3 others were building Shopify. And I said, I would like to move back to Ottawa and help you build Shopify into a much larger beast. I love the product. I built my own company on it. Toby and Daniel and Cody were some of the smartest, brightest, most ambitious people I'd ever met. I was inspired by them. And in early 2010, my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, and I moved back to Ottawa. And I spent the last 6 years with these guys building this company called Shopify. And today, Shopify has more than 240,000 stores in more than 150 countries. Our stores have sold more than $10 billion worth of products, which is really cool. More importantly, we have 1,300 people that work at Shopify who are some of the brightest, smartest people I've ever met in my entire life. And together, we're trying to change retail, not in Ottawa, not in Canada, but everywhere around the world. And so my journey as an entrepreneur, I'm really just at the beginning of that journey. But I've been doing this now since I was 13 years old. And as you sit here as students, Either you're thinking about starting a business, or you have a business, or you're trying to get me to convince you not to take that big law firm job, but instead start selling t-shirts. What I can tell you is that the coupling of being an entrepreneur and being a student is incredible. And if you leverage your environment, what you have around you, and you leverage the fact that if the business doesn't work out, it doesn't really matter. You can always try it again. You can build something incredibly timeless. And so that's a bit about my story, and hope you guys enjoyed that. Yeah. I'm gonna hype this.
I got broads in Atlanta, twisted the lean in the family, credit cards and the scammers, hitting the licks in the van, legacy, family.
Thanks for the talk, Harley. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
No, it's always exciting to hear the Shopify story. Yeah, but going back to like your earlier days, when you started your t-shirt business, and you had your classes, you had all this stuff going on. How did that like experience kind of add in and help you become a better entrepreneur?
As many of you know, like when you're starting out as an entrepreneur, you have very few resources and you have a lot of stuff to do. And so even at 13 years old, where I was sort of doing this DJ thing on the side and also going to first year of high school or something, I had to figure out time management. I had to stretch every single hour that I had to do a bunch of different things. When I started the t-shirt business, I didn't have that much money, and so I had to be extremely resourceful because every single dollar counted. I think one of the lessons, like if you watch some movie about entrepreneurship, I think you get the sense that it's glamorous and it's wonderfully, inspiring. And the truth is, most businesses, when they get started, and even as they scale, it's a grind. I mean, you gotta hustle, right? You have to love it. If you don't love it, it's going to be, it'll kill you. And so I think, concurrently running a business while being in school and learning about time management and learning about how to be extremely resourceful, that was a great lesson. That's a great lesson for any entrepreneur.
So what would you tell the students in the audience that are going through classes, they want to start something? Like,
I think you should do it. If you think you don't have enough time, put on your big boy pants. That's it. You make time, right? I think that's what I would say. I think that I look at people in the crowd that I know, whether it's Luke or it's David Siegel from creator of David's Tea. Like all these guys had so much on their plate when they started their companies, and they've all built some of the most incredible businesses in the world while having kids, while being in school, while having part-time jobs. If you love it and you're passionate about it, you make it work. That's what I would say.
So kind of off-topic question. But how are your grades in school?
Yeah. They were good enough that they got me to the next step, but not good enough that my parents ever put it up in the fridge. Right? I think that's fair. They were good enough that as soon as I knew I wanted to go to law school, I made sure my grades were good enough to get me into law school. Yeah. As soon as I knew I wanted to go to McGill, I made sure my high school grades were good enough to get me into McGill. But my grades were optimized for the next step, not necessarily for, dean's list. Ironically, in the dean of Telfer's here, and he was one of my professors in my MBA, I actually did really well in my MBA courses because it was natural to me. I loved it. It was super fun. But same thing in law school. My law school grades were good enough to get me the job that I wanted, but I was not the gold star medalist, right? And I actually think that in the same way I've been resourceful as an entrepreneur, I was also very resourceful as a student. I got really good at taking tests. I got really good at getting the grade I needed to get to the next step. So I'm not sure I'd be a good role model for most students. And if there are parents in the room, I'm sorry.
So kind of you had like minimum viable grades?
Viable grades, yeah. The MVG, obviously, right?
Yeah. Next question. Personal growth is really big for you.
It is.
You still have coaches right now. You have an executive coach. How do you keep personal growth like at the heart of all you do and make sure you're still growing personally so the people around you still grow?
I think everyone does it differently. I know, for Toby reads a ton. I mean, he's always reading a ton of books that I can't even understand the title of these books. I mean, he throws himself into the content. The way that I learn is with people. And so I surround myself with people that are better, smarter, faster than I am. That's one way that I do it. The second way that I make sure personal growth is something that is embedded in my life is I've become really, really comfortable with being uncomfortable. So some of you that follow me on Twitter, I just started taking flying lessons. I'm horrible at flying. Like, I'm not that great at doing math on the spot. Calculating pressure density is very difficult for me. But I sit in these classes at the Rockcliffe Airport from 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock on Wednesday nights, and I'm really bad at it. I'm the worst student in the class, and I love it. I love being that guy who I know that if I'm going to get really good, I need to work really hard on it. And so, this year for me, flying is something that I'm challenging myself with. Last year it was taking guitar lessons. Hopefully being a father next year will be something that I'll get good at, I hope. But I'm constantly trying to put myself in situations where I'm uncomfortable. And I think what tends to happen is, as we all get older and we all get more and more successful or more and more accomplished, we tend to decide that I know what I know and that's the end of it and I'm good at this stuff and I'm just going to continue. And I think that's a shitty way to live life. I think a much more exciting way to live life is to constantly put yourself in situations where you are completely out of your comfort zone.
Okay, so how do you find those people that are better than you, that challenge you, and that help you grow? A, and then B, like when it gets that uncomfortable, how do you keep yourself going?
Like you've probably read books that say this, like you are the 5 people that you surround yourself most with, right? That's cliche and kind of cheesy to say, but I kind of believe that, right? I really do believe that. And so I make sure the people in my life are people that are also challenging themselves. They are people that are also putting themselves outside their comfort zones. In terms of how do you meet more people like that, Brandon was saying that when he was starting Tattoo Hero, he was working out of the Shopify office in our lounge at our old office in the Byward Market, and he was talking about what tattoo parlors need. And I'm like, dude, get up and go to the tattoo parlor. Like, there's like 25,000 tattoo parlors in Ottawa. Just go and talk to these tattoo artists, right? Instead of assuming what they want. Pick yourself up and go. If you know that you may have people like you in another city, go spend a weekend there. Just like there are events like Legacy here in Ottawa, which is amazing. There are other events in other cities. I think getting out and meeting new people is really important for that. But that's a personal thing for me. That's how I meet new people. In other cases, I know Toby's met a lot of people through open source projects, right? By contributing to these incredible open source projects, he's met, guys like David Heinemeier Hansen, and together they helped build Ruby on Rails. That's because he found his tribe online. And so find your own tribe. And if you're not sure how to find them, find a bunch of tribes, throw some shit at the wall and see what sticks. Yeah. That's what I would say.
Awesome. And more like student-focused, what do you see some of the biggest mistakes students that want to become entrepreneurs want to do something are making today?
I think unlike every other profession, entrepreneurship is a mentality, not a profession. You can, if you're a good entrepreneur and you're a good business person, you can make money from it, but it isn't like, I'm going to go to school to become an accountant, or I'm going to go to school to become a doctor. The best way to articulate it is this way. I am 24/7 entrepreneur. I don't turn it on, turn it off. But I have friends that are accountants and lawyers who, when they go home at 7 o'clock on a Friday night after working a hard week, they take off their lawyer hat and now they're husband, dad, friend, whatever. I think the biggest difference is that entrepreneurship isn't a profession. It's a philosophy. It's a mentality. And it's not for everyone. And it's perfectly okay if it's not for you. But I think that a lot of people assume that entrepreneurship is sort of the destination, and I think it's actually the journey. I will always be an entrepreneur. Whatever I do, that is the lens that I'm going to bring to it. And the other thing that I got wrong as a student was, I hate my 18-year-old self.
Why?
Because when I was 18 years old, I was full of hubris, and I was full of unqualified confidence, and I surrounded myself with people just like me. And actually, I'm 33 years old now. I can tell you that the people I surround myself with professionally are all very different than me. They all complement me. We're all very, very different. I listen way more. I mean, I speak with conviction, but I listen as if I know nothing. And I just think when I was 18 years old, even when I was 22 years old, I felt like I knew everything there was to know about business and T-shirts and hustle and entrepreneurship. And I'm 33 now, and I realize I know very little, and it's very refreshing to feel that way. But if I had to go back in time and tell my 22-year-old self something, it'd be drop the shit and listen more and assume that you can learn more from other people because I think you can.
So you still have a lot of coaches. You have mentors now.
I do.
You have people that you mentor yourself.
Yep.
What's the difference between when you were at that age compared to now, like the type of mentors you were looking for?
So It's actually a really good point, and I'll spend a second on this because I got really lucky with this. So I think I mentioned to the crowd that like in 2001, I was 17. My dad really went bankrupt. We lost all our money. And what happened was a bunch of my father's friends were really mad at my dad because he did things that they didn't like, but they felt bad for me. And so what that did for me was that gave me an opportunity to go to my father's friends, some of which were very accomplished people, and ask them if they can help me, if they can be my mentor. And so that was my gateway into creating mentorships with guys like Phil Reimer, who's still my mentor. He runs Denton's law firm here in Ottawa. But throughout my life, as I met different people, I had different mentors that provided a perspective that were really unique. So one of my mentors, his name is Ross Paperman. He runs a funeral home in Montreal, of all things. He has the best relationship with his family of any entrepreneur I've ever met. He is just, the way that he is with his wife and his kids is inspiring to me. And I'm 2 months away from having my first child, and I hope I'm as good as a father as he is. So I use him as a mentor for the parenting and relationship side of things. I have a mentor of mine in Toronto who's in finance, and the way that he understands money is inspiring to me. And so he's my mentor that I look at when I'm trying to think about my own financial future and how I invest my money. I've been collecting these mentors for a long time, but the key, I believe, is that I have actually articulated to these people that I want you to be my mentor. And there is a responsibility that you have if you're going to agree to this. And you can say no, but we're not just going to have a coffee every couple of weeks or couple of months. I'm going to call you once a month, and it's going to be in the calendar, and we're going to have a 1-hour chat. And if you don't want this, no problem, say no. But this is what my expectation is of you as a mentor. And I still call these people, and so I really have had a group of 5 core mentors for at least the last 5 or 6 years, maybe even longer, maybe 10 years. On the coaching side, that's very different. A coach is someone who I can go to and say, I'm having a problem with this particular issue at work. Here are the variables, here are the factors involved. Let's whiteboard it out together. It's far more of him helping me, whereas the mentorship is much more of a relationship-based dynamic. And I think having coaches has been one of the best things that I've ever done. We now have, I think, 5 or closer to 8 full-time coaches at Shopify. Anyone at Shopify that manages people, we invite them to see a coach. They don't have to, but we encourage them to see a coach. But some people are born leaders, and you've met these people, and people just follow them. But nobody is born as a great manager. It's something you actually have to learn, and it's very, very difficult. I'm still not a great manager, but my ambition today is to become the best manager that the people that work for me have ever worked for. And I'm going to be working on this for a very long time. That's what I get help from my coach with. But my mentors help me with my personal life, and they help me with my, with my hobbies. And I think having both are really important. But I think a lot of people misinterpret the idea of a mentor as just someone that they call on from time to time. It's very important that your mentor knows that they are your mentor, because there is a responsibility attached to it. I think it's really important.
So as a mentor yourself to some people, like, what do you look for people approaching you for you to be their mentors?
Look, I look for the guy that doesn't send me a crap email that says, please come speak at Legacy Conference, but he shows up at a convocation speech in sweatpants and says, hey, I just came here. I don't know what you were wearing, but you weren't dressed as nicely as the rest of them were.
I was wearing a black V-neck.
A black V-neck.
I think that helps.
Even black V-neck, that's great. I mean, but that's what I look for. I look for people that are thinking differently, that are hustling really, really hard. I am here on the stage right now because of what you did. Yeah. I don't want the guy that played on the tennis team. I want the guy that created the tennis team. I don't want the girl that worked at a charity. I want the girl that saw a problem with a charity and created her own charity. I want a founder type. I want someone who has a growth mentality, who's thinking about putting themselves in uncomfortable situations. That's where I think I can add the most value. I can't add value to someone who's kind of just going through the stages or the steps or the normal course of action of their own career. I can't add value to someone like that.
Yeah. So kind of related, like how you have different types of mentors for like financing or like family life balance. What type of a mentor are you to your mentees?
Probably like something that gives them a lot of anxiety and yells at them a lot. I don't know. I'm not really sure, actually. I think that, I don't know. That's a really, really good question. I think it'd be better to ask those people what type of mentor I am. Most of the conversations I have with a lot of people are around business and entrepreneurship and building companies. And some people that I'm mentoring now are at the stage where they're thinking of taking their company public, and I can help them in a very specific way through what happened with the Shopify IPO. But by the way, in other cases, like your mentor doesn't have to be someone who's much older than you or much more accomplished. I mean, David Siegel is one of my mentors. We meet for lunch once a week in my office, and he helps me. He's got 2 daughters. I'm about to have a daughter. He helps me with that, right? And we're the same age. But find people that you have in your lives, whether they're remote or they're close by, and if they have someone to teach you and you believe that this is someone you can continuously learn from, bring them closer to you. So I'm not answering your question because I'm not really sure.
All right, well, unfortunately, we're out of time. But honestly, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you guys for having me. Thank you.
We are not the same, I am too reckless. I'm not trying to go in that direction. They've been doing too much flexing, and they about to call the wrong attention.